I'm a Hive committer, and someone asked me this question: is AI real or is it crap? Let me just ask it some questions about Hive, and it succeeded in confusing me. I asked it to write a query, and it wrote a query of syntax I had never seen before. And I was like, am I just out of the loop? I mean, I know I haven't been on the mailing list this month. And then what I realized is that particular model, or the way I prompted it, it's a fusion of every SQL dialect it's ever seen, and it gives you this fusiony answer of a syntax that doesn't exist. This is great, but it even fooled me.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Alex.
And my name is OP.
Welcome to AI on Fire, the podcast where ideas spark, code burns, and the future of AI takes shape through the real stories from the people behind it.
Every fire needs heat, fuel, and oxygen. Control those, and you shape the flame. That's how we think about AI too. Not magic, not hype, but something that has to be engineered correctly.
Today's episode is very much about that. We're joined by Ed Capriolo, an engineer who has built a wide range of open source projects, and we'll leave all the links behind, not in behind, but in the comments below. Check them out. They're awesome. So there's some database and collection stuff, functional programming tools, language model delivery, and DevOps automation. And this conversation isn't about demos or buzzwords. It's about what happens when AI meets real system, real constraints, and real production code. Ed, welcome to the show.
Alex, thanks for having me. I definitely really appreciate your career and all the work you're doing to, build these communities like the Triangle Tech Talks and this. It's really amazing work. And to your colleague too. I've just met him, but thank you guys both for doing this.
Awesome. Glad to have you here. So let's get to it. You've worked across a plenty wide spectrum: databases, infrastructure, libraries, automation. What originally pulled you towards system level engineering instead of higher level application work?
Okay. So early in my career, I actually worked in a regional data center. So I was always solving problems as a service provider. And I find that work really cool. So, I'm going to date myself here. I'll tell you, I'm in my 40s. So, in the advent of spam, we had these distributed computing problems. Before, you had one mail server and it was fine. And all of a sudden, it was getting hit with relay spam. And we had to build straightforward things like, let's put a load balancer, let's change the MX record, put a load balancer to intercept all this spam, and then forward it to the backend server only if, thus. So I was like, so I'm solving these problems just to deal with spam. I need a load balancer for all the spam. And that took me, where I was going. Like, I got into the Hadoop stuff, the Hive stuff, because, we were just facing these early on problems of how do I query a data set that doesn't even fit on one machine? And to just give some perspective on how much things have changed, 100 megahertz computers was my first machine, and you're talking, gigabyte, 15K hard drives were amazing, and, getting 16 gigs of RAM cost more than a small car. These were at the time, these were the challenges that I just found the most, exciting.
Good old days.
Yes.
So it looks like your project, maybe not often, or maybe often, are born from some sort of sense of friction where you see some dissatisfaction with how existing tools function. Is it like common starting point for you, or time to time? What is your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I know this is about AI, so we're going to hit on this kind of topic a lot. But when I was starting off, everything was much less. We talked about the RAM, but even the internet was much less. So you got used to being a do-it-yourselfer. Like, if you were running, you could Google search something. You might find like a make file or a patch file that's like, here's the problem you're having with Red Hat on your i386. It's not an uphill both ways story, right? But I've noticed today that even before the advent of AI, people were worried about prompting. People were too reliant on Google. Like, everything you say, the first thing they want to do is pop it into Google. And I would I would find coworkers, just have a general exception like file not found, throw it into Google. It's like, you're not going to find the answer for file not found. It's your application is looking in the wrong place. So I guess, so you don't want to be quixotic. Like, you don't want to build everything from scratch, but also you want to take your innovation points, and you want to, build what you think matters to you. And usually you learn a real lot in that process. So, like in AI, like in my inference engine that I'm working on, I learned that the difference between llama tokenization and Quen tokenization, which is very different. Llama splits on spaces, but QN actually includes, a space before the beginning of words. And these are things that just you totally pass over if you don't dive in and just, try to rewrite something just for no reason sometimes.
Yeah, and that's interesting, like because what we see right now, a lot of AI copilots or Lovable or any other AI code generating agents or tools or EDE. There are many people, like create new application from scratch. Instead of buying, they just create a new application to use, and this is like some sort of in one way in line with what you're saying, and then like another, okay, we have another set of people who actually want to create, like reinvent the same stuff, like in-house instead of like buy uh existing tools. That's interesting.
Yeah, and speaking about good old days, right? Do you remember the Stack Overflow? I mean, I don't use it anymore for some reasons because I just use some AI tools that can pull some answers from it. I hope it's not pulling the answers that I need from the questions that people ask on Stack Overflow.
Well, that always existed. So in the old days, if you were searching a problem, like you would join the mailing list, post the question, and you'd be searching for the answer for weeks. And you were in trouble when you do the Google search, and then your question appears on the Google search. Then like it's just nothing out there, and like so yeah. The practical challenge with that, I know we're going to talk about this probably, and other people have, is the information, even from the inference engine, is only as good as what it's seeded with, that with what's out there. It's really, before finance, I worked in media, and that became a big problem. Was just like, if you think about the old days, magazines, it was like long form was really valuable. And then it became about like short form. Like I could, it disrupted the publishing industry. Like, oh, why write this long form article and do all this research and only 20,000 people read it? If I bang out things about Justin Bieber, I get 40,000 views a pop and I'm making more money. So that's kind of the challenge of a lot of this stuff is if the content isn't there, the summarization of the AI won't give you the right answer because it just doesn't exist.
Yeah, yeah. And it's our responsibility to create those answers at some point of time, right? And speaking about the answer creation, so we're looking at your repositories like tag collections and DYSFX or DISFX.
It's dysfunctional, like me. It's
Dysfunctional, all
dysfunction.
right.
Dysfunction.
Dysfunctional repo. Yeah, I love it. And we actually read it through AI tool, and it told us that you really care about API design. So where did the mindset come from?
I mean, I think you have to spend time in what you're building. The saying penny wise, pound foolish. Uh, you know, I, and it's very relevant to AI. I think I'm going to say that about 100 times. There's this, let's just build the prototype quick and then deal with it. Like, how many times have you had that in your career where you're stuck with that? So I try to, be diligent in what I'm building. So that kind of dysfunctional, actually, a lot of the things in there are actually born from lessons learned elsewhere. Like the try just comes from Scala's try, which comes from Haskell's try, which is just a monadic type of approach. And it's very interesting. Like, for example, when you use Go's error handling is very C style. You call a method and then it returns a tuple of either the result on the left or the integer on the right. And then you're forced to read the integer and say, is that integer error? Or it's not integer, but it could be an error. And then you end up with code that kind of branches like this, like if Redis, if MySQL, if something, now do operation. And in a try, if you believe in that kind of functional paradigm, you could sometimes make that a lot lighter of just try this, get or else. Because from the end user standpoint, the end user, if it's like a web app, doesn't care if it's a Redis exception or a MySQL exception or a couldn't connect to message bus exception. You're going to give them the same standard boilerplate exception. It's down because Alex tweaked the wrong thing. Sorry, we'll fire him. But helpful error page with cool graphics. So that's what you want to just make something deliberate such that the code is easy to maintain. And I don't have a problem with thinking through those designs.
I love this. Like blame culture, blame Alex, blame whoever made a mistake, right? Blame
Well,
AI.
not
Now we should all blame the yeah, AI.
yeah. Well, not blame culture, but like if like again, these are lessons learned, the tries and the either. It's a code is data paradigm, and people might resist that. They might say, but those aren't don't exist in Java, and you shouldn't code that way because that's not idiomatic. But it's not necessarily true because a lot of frameworks take you away from code, and then you're not writing idiomatic Java code anyway. You're working with a framework. Like if you use Webflux, it's a lot of dot and thens, dot and then dot compose. So it's not idiomatic try catch Java anymore. It's something else. That's kind of like and that library. So dysfunction, about 6 libraries have come and gone that have a Java try. So like var_v is gone. It's unsupported. So the only try out there is var_v. And when you go to the var_v repo, it's still used in a lot of projects and it says, we're not maintaining this anymore. YOLO. So, in this open source vulnerability culture, if there's one thing wrong in try, you're going to have to patch it yourself or pivot off it anyway. So now you got my try if you want to get off the var_v try.
All right. Now that's great. So now switching gear to the AI assistant coding, right? So many tools today are good at like generating snippets, boilerplates, some tests. I actually use Copilot to generate unit tests for my Go code, and it does somehow good. But your work focuses on deeper concerns, like error handling, data structure, performance. So where do you see AI helping you, and where does it still fail short?
Well, let me start with Full Shark because those are always the fun war stories, like the complaints. So you mentioned Go. I've seen, AI put the imports for Go at the top and the bottom. It's just syntactically wrong. And that's because, like I said, working with these smaller models, I've dug into a lot of these problems. It's usually a training set where there's not as much Go code on a given topic. And as a result, it's not trained as well. It's not as fluent in Go, and it thinks imports at the bottom are okay. Other example, a Hive committer. So I do a lot of work with Apache Hive. And when I first was getting it, was someone asked me this question: Is AI real or is it crap? I was like, well, let me just ask it some questions about Hive, and it succeeded in confusing me. I asked it to write a query, and it wrote a query of syntax I had never seen before. And I was like, am I just out of the loop? I mean, I know I haven't been on the mailing list this month. And then what I realized is that particular model or the way I prompted it's a fusion of every SQL dialect it's ever seen, and it gives you this fusiony answer of a syntax that doesn't exist. So it's like, but it made me double check myself. I was like, oh, did someone add that to Hive? This is great. And then I'm like, no, it's not really there. It's totally a hallucination, but it even fooled me, someone very thorough. And then the good parts obviously are, like I said, I think, and I use it a lot in, what do I do in that Google example? I do a query in Google. I see 10 pages. I try to look at the subjects and figure out which one is most likely to produce a nice answer. It's nice that the AI will cut through the prose and try to give me the steps. I still check them very carefully, but I love that flow of like, um, here's my question. I don't want to read the paragraphs of prose. Just give me the solution. Let me vet it and let me try it. I enjoy that.
Yeah, and another aspect of this one, while AI generated code is often successful or might be some sort of successful with happy passes scenarios, some limitation might be aligned into failure passes. And interesting how, from your perspective, how capable AI generated code today on handling those?
So interestingly enough, a lot of people complain or remark that it's over verbose, like it puts too many guard statements in code. So for example, normally when you're writing code, a lot of people focus on let me do my error checking as close to the front as possible. And thus I've streamlined the code and I don't have to worry about that condition as it falls through every method. So the AI tends to not do that because of either just context window or how it was prompted to. It will include those guards everywhere. So it would write extra stuff in terms of the same check in multiple places. Will sometimes, I think, it will try its best. Like, Alex mentioned using it in test. So I've seen it try to generate a test for my circle class. And it's smart enough to know that when you compare doubles, you shouldn't compare them exactly. But by default, it actually uses a delta compare that was too small and the test still failed. So it tried to do the right thing. It was like, I'm going to write a unit test and I'm not going to compare the floating point with the double equals. And it tried to use assert almost equals or whatever the name of the method was, but it still made the delta a little too big and it didn't run. So like it was on point, precise but not accurate, I guess is the saying, right?
All right. So speaking about running, you have a project called Deliverance, and I have two questions here. Is it somehow related or inspired by the classical movie Deliverance?
No, but it was in my thinking. So no, it was not. But I
All right.
haven't seen it.
But I mean, it helps to run and deliver models, language models, in startup performance, right? So, as more AI systems move into production, do you think performance and startup costs are being underestimated right now?
Um, Well, performance is always tricky, as you know. So interestingly enough, the reason I named Deliverance was I didn't want to call it J inference. Like let's just stick a J in front of it for Java. So I had to hit the thesaurus.com and figure out what is a good synonym for inference. So that's kind of where it came from. So startup costs, I mean, like, look, there's a lot of startup costs with AI. You could, even if you look at the cloud, if you were going to run, if you're going to go get a nice GPU and try to load a big model, everybody's like, oh, boy, this chat gpt 128 billion param model, you need a lot of hardware to run that locally, and that's just the hardware cost. You gotta run vllm yourself or some inference engine, and you gotta do a lot there. So the startup, and if you go with a cloud solution, you could go with OpenAI, or you could go, and then you have a different set of problems. You're worried about data exfiltrating, right? Or you could go with Amazon Bedrock. It's still going to the cloud, but it's a Bedrock instance you control, and you could put a walled garden on it. So the question of your thing is the startup costs being considered. I would say it's a tricky problem because everything's moving so fast. You're talking new frameworks are appearing, new solutions are appearing. So it's really hard to control every aspect of this because it's not just like, go get me a mail server. This one's $10, this one's $20. You're hearing a different agent framework every week, with different stuff. I hope that answers your question.
So you developed Nibiru with a pluggable database architecture, correct?
Yeah, it's just one of my pet projects. It's a build a NoSQL yourself type solution.
Okay. So how do the principle of database design actually, in particular, those concerning flexibility, coupling, long-term maintenance, translate into, modern AI system development?
Right. Well, as I just mentioned, it's moving quick. So the lessons are, as always, you have to lock into something. You have to pick a horse that wins, and it's not always easy. So for example, if you were to take features that OpenAI has, right, which is just they're pure, you could use their chat completions, or you could use their, not every Olama doesn't have the same set of features. So in other words, you're kind of in a bind if you use a feature that only one vendor has and you become really reliant on it. You may not be able to get that somewhere else. That's not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is just dealing with the compatibility. So for example, one inference engine may have really great support for structured outputs. That's like, you could ask it a question and say, I want you to return this data matching this JSON schema. And another system may not even have that support. So then you run into this thing where, because it doesn't have structured outputs, you may be able to prompt it like, only answer in JSON that matches like this, but it's then much less likely to do it exactly right. It may try to match that schema. It may fail very miserably. On that front, since there's so much new stuff, the standardization is hard. Uh, and if you're talking, if you're trying to look at, like, for example, the agent frameworks, LangChain, LangFlow, LangGraph, well, once I finish my inference engine, I'm gonna build mine next. I saw someone today. They're like, I hate it what Python did. I just rewrote it in Rust. So you're talking, it's the final frontier of compatibility. And I think you just have to, like, as always, what are your functionals? What are your non-functionals? What are you really trying to build? And then, you probably have to put a plan together, which is like, if we're going to run this, you know, what does this mean? If you choose that as your inference engine, how often will I have to update it? If I choose, this agent library, versus, the one OpenAI ones, will it run out of support? Will it become unpopular? You have to do that yourself for your organization and your own risk appetite. I can't give everyone the right recipe there.
All right. Yeah, sounds good. But still, you have around 2 decades of engineering experience, right? And obviously, you gain a lot of knowledge during those years. So, are you worried at all that AI generated code will encourage people to accept somehow working code, somehow working system behavior? Or are you still think that we'll have some good standards?
I mean, I think, it depends on the business, the application, the use case. So, I run into this all the time. People use Redis, but they don't know how it works. And I like, they'll be like, like, it's okay. They don't need to know. It doesn't matter, right? Like, in other words, like, they'll be like, oh, we use Redis locking. And I'm like, well, what do you do in the failover scenario? They're like, well, that almost never happens, I guess. And it's fine, because for that application, it doesn't matter if they lose a
If they
write
don't
or
see it's not
something.
happening, right?
Right, just in the sense of, like, it depends on what you're doing. Like, if you're really doing, like, if you're, like, in finance and these are $1,000,000 payments and one slips off the queue, that's a problem. But if you're just doing ad tech and there's a zillion that fly through, and if, there's no lost revenue, it's not a problem. So, I mean, the only thing I could say is, like, on those systems, you know, the reliability and, fitness only matters as much as the application.
Mm.
I think, like, if you've seen the blog that, the thinking machines did, I think that's a very relevant topic, is getting the same repeatable answers from inference engines. That's very kind of challenging and relevant to a lot of applications and a lot of people. If you're kind of familiar with that challenge, one can be, if you ask the same inference engine the same question twice, based on what's in the key cache, you may get a different answer.
Absolutely.
Pretty problematic. Sometimes the second one is better than the first, but the real problem is, like, obviously the reproducibility of it, because then you're kind of stuck. Like, if you're trying to build an agent and you want the agent, you're stuck saying, oh, I'll have to have the agent generate me Go code or generate me Java code, instead of, I don't want to ask that same question in prod, because if I ask the same question I asked in UAT, it may do it a different way, come up with something very different. So that's a pretty big challenge, I think.
Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting perspective. So another one, the current enthusiast suggests that AI can automate almost everything. Based on your expertise and experience, what areas benefit most from automation from your perspective, and what actually less obvious but with inherent risks?
So AI for automation, it's kind of since I do a lot of automation in my life, and it's an interesting discipline, because, like, when I do development is very wide thinking. I could do this with the stack, I could do this with the queue, I could do this a lot of different ways. Where automation is more kind of, I don't want to say brainless, but, I got to apply this thing to 50 different servers, or I want to make sure I get the exact same version of Yelm on every single one of them. Uh, like, there's the same recipes are there as, like, well, I don't know how to write Ansible. Let me just ask and let me give it a first shot, like, so there's always that entry point of, like, can I get something I don't know very quickly? And the only thing I would say about that is that always tops out. Like, if you try to start in the middle of something, like, I tried that. Like, I wasn't very good with Docker, and I've been using it a lot lately. So I just used to try to Google search everything. How do I enter the Docker with Bash? I could Google it and I could find an answer, right? But then fundamentally, my whole workflow is me switching windows all the time. How do I start the process? How do I stop the process? How do I do whatever? And there's just a point where you got to stop and be like, I need to learn this. Like, I can't, if I'm just looking for a little quick answer and I'm only going to dip in and out of this project, fine, just vibe it away. But if you're going to work it all the time and you're stuck jumping between windows for every little thing,
Mhm.
it's not efficient.
Makes sense. Yeah. I mean, obviously, you need to gain knowledge. Even with AI, it's just a tool that helps you to gain knowledge, but you cannot just rely on everything and just blindly repeat the comments.
Well, what it is, it's a lossy summary of everything that's ever been it trained on. So it's like almost like, in that sense, you could think about it as a human. You've read every book and you have pretty good recall, but having read every book ever, you get some of the facts a little wrong sometimes, and it's understandable. Like if you say, "Well, Coyote, he knows about every book ever made," but he got that wrong. No
One
one
book
would
can
say,
contradict to other, right? So it's all tricky.
well, that's where the math of the, like people kind of blame this on like hallucinations, but if you spend a lot of time studying one scenario, I had a funny one. I asked a very small model, what book did I write? It told me I wrote a book about finance. I actually kind of figured out why, because there was some mashup page that was like lots of books from lots of authors. My book was over here, and some other guy wrote that book about finance over here. And because of the way the table was formatted, it thought they were the same line, and our tokens were close enough together or whatever. And I'm not sure that's exactly why, but I'm almost positively convinced that's why it thought I wrote that whole book about finance. So it was a hallucination of data, that it interpreted in a reasonable-ish way. We were on the same page and those words are close together. So maybe I did write that book, but it's not exactly on point. You know what I mean?
Maybe I did write the book. I was drunk, right? I don't remember.
Well, if I wrote a book about finance, I would not suggest following that book.
You never know, right? So it's completely hectic right now. All right, but let's get to the fire drill. So we have 10 questions, short answers only, one sentence each. Ready, set, ding, 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 ding.
All right. AI written code, helpful assistance or dangerous shortcut?
That's helpful.
All right. Harder problem, scalability or maintainability?
Maintainability is a hard problem.
Breaks first in AI generated code, performance, readability, or edge cases?
Let's just say, edge cases.
All right. Databases or distributed systems, which one humbles engineer faster?
Distributed systems for sure.
So, name an engineering habit you think more people should learn and why.
I would say learn a assembly code. Just take something that's down, 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 down to the as low as you can get.
All right. Better code comes from better tools or better thinking?
Thinking.
Something that might be missing somehow. All right. Functional pattern in Java, underused or overcomplicated?
Underused, but getting there.
All right. All right. What's one AI thing that is misunderstood by the AI tools right now?
Misunderstood. I mean, I would say that, there's this big area which is developing on vector databases versus knowledge graphs. I think there's a big gap in terms of content and content relevancy, and then, AI tools understanding those things.
I would say how to be consistent on their answers, right? They don't understand this, how to be consistent. What? Just
Well,
say
that's
it
part
about
of
it. They
that's
don't
part of
understand anything, right? They just
well,
give you the mathematical output.
Well, that's the challenge is, and that's, I don't know how much time you guys want to spend this. You could talk about this forever, right? But that is the challenge. Like if you, a lot of people, if you get down in the weeds of something, like if you check out my deliverance code and you could see what I'm missing that OpenAI has. One of the most simple things is one of the first complaints I saw was someone saying they found a hack where they just said, repeat the same word indefinitely, and OpenAI repeats it and then starts spitting out random stuff. That is by design. It's called presence penalty, which is an inference engine could easily get stuck in a loop. So what they usually do is they penalize already seen tokens a little bit so they don't get stuck in a loop. So that's by design because an inference engine will loop around, if a sentence starts and ends in the same word, it could theoretically go in a loop right then and there. So presence penalty, and that's why it's good to get low level. And if you really understand why it's giving you this answer, that's why.
I just learned something new. Awesome.
That's cool. That's cool. Really cool. So, what single, and you did like a lot of automation, I believe, right now, but what single task in your workflow right now would you choose to automate? Something that you haven't automated yet?
I want to generate Kubernetes from pictures. I want to just because I just want to draw something and I don't want to get involved with, this thing only works if everything has IPs. And thus I need an operator that takes my Kafka and exposes internal IPs as external IPs and gets the TLS terminations right and blah blah blah. I just want to draw the picture and be like, fine, if you insist it be in Kubernetes, fine, but just make this thing in Kubernetes. Give me a 10 node Kafka cluster over there. Go. That's what I would do.
Startup idea over here, right? So
Okay.
if you guys don't know what to get up with, just I want my diagram to be created on Kubernetes, and that's it, right? All right, last question. What still absolutely requires a human in software engineering?
Everything. As I told you, the inference engine is just trained on text that's already out there. And I've kind of told you why. We've talked about it. There's a growth in content, which is great. But if you want to Google this, Google the story about how many bears has Russia shot into space. And it's the inference engines have trained themselves on this over years. So humans are needed because if 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 with like, I could only tell you this. I read an article and I believe it to be true. They let these agents run wild, just keep going, and they ended up complementing each other on nothing. Just like what at first it started out with a plan. It was like, we're going to build a software system, and it was like, good, okay, we're going to add this feature, good. And then by the end, it was just one thing was just making up bogus features. The next thing was doing them, and then the next thing was great. You did an amazing job on that. So you need judgment, because otherwise they just fall into this loop of self. And that's true with people too.
Great job on giving me some compliments, right? Oh, thank you.
Yes.
Your compliments
Yes.
is great.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Amazing.
All right, let's get to the almost the final section, the forecast. So, looking forward a few years from now, what do you think the one AI thing that people are wrong about?
Well, I think they're wrong right now about the AI, taking the jobs. I think in the U.S. especially, it's an economy thing. It's very hard to predict what things will look like in 5 years. I think what everyone's wrong about is they're too big on generative AI. Like, it's almost become the same thing. Like, AI is just generative AI. Like, no other AI exists. And if you were doing old school ML, like linear regression, you're like, so I see a lot of things that people are trying to throw into the generative AI box, where I'm like, that is an AI problem. It's just not a generative AI problem, where that is an ML problem. And you should go train a linear regression model to solve that problem and stop coming at it the way you are. So I think in five
No,
years, I think it'll shift a little back, and it'll, these other frameworks that are out there that aren't generative AI based will start getting some more daylight.
So on this note, do you think generative AI will change what we build more, and how we build it?
I mean, it already has, absolutely. It's what's it great for? It's a great idea factory. Like, I'm into sci-fi, and I wanted to write a book, and I'm just like, man, what are some crazy planets that could exist in the universe? And it gives you something so brilliant, like, oh, it's a planet where it's liquid hydrogen, but it's on fire all the time, but it's freezing cold too. And you're like, "Ugh, that's amazing. Like, that's really beautiful stuff." And like, it's bound in science, but it's like a thought that I would have never went down. Or if, like, I have a great story, but I'm not a great artist, and I don't want to pay someone else to draw the cover of my book. I just feed it in, and I could deliver my vision of my great story, and the parts I don't care as much about, the cover art, are there for me. And I think that's the most
Mhm.
beautiful part of it. It enables you to, focus on what you want, and maybe, you know, get some parts
that's
that you
awesome. I
don't
think
want
that
to do.
model was trained on Rick and Morty cartoon.
Yes.
So, like, to double click on this one, uh, you said that models usually use only what they were trained on. But like when you ask for something crazy, as you just proposed, something that have never been a true or written, and it still generates something new for you, or it's taken from somewhere, this idea. So I was like, is it like really new idea, or it's like new idea for you, but actually this is not a new idea, and somebody already wrote something about this, and model just took pieces from different places and reintroduced to you as a new idea.
I think that's like an existential question, because I is any idea I ever had really unique? Like, well, no, because I've read books and I've talked to people, and then my mind is doing something similar. It's connecting some neurons, and then with some electron fires through, and it's my idea. So I would say, like, who cares at that point? It's a good idea, do it. Like, I think two people invented the light bulb or the telephone about the same time, right? Simultaneous invention because the situation was right. Like electronics were at the right state, people were at the right state, economics was at the right state, and then the need for the telephone became apparent to two people at exactly that, almost the exact same time. What was the story? The two light bulb, the two patents came in the office the same day. What are the odds? That happens a lot. So whose idea was it? Is it original? No. Containers, is that original? No. Solaris 10 had containers, but everybody's talking about Docker like it just came out last week. And the Solaris 10 guys were like, what the heck, man? We had, the FreeBSDs guys were like, we just called them jails. That was inherent to FreeBSD from the beginning. Who cares about Docker? It's kind of the same idea, but just a new implementation, and the timing and the economics is better.
All right. Yeah, that's awesome. And speaking about timing, so looking back at your experience, so what skill do you think will matter most as AI becomes part of everyday development?
I think the thing that matters most that I'm lacking on is really the statistical skill, because you're phrasing the problems differently. Like when you're going into, an imperative style of build this thing for that reason, to I have my reasons, but I don't know what I want to build, or I don't know. I know I want to build this, but I don't have the reasons. So like you're going to get things back statistically. Now, how do you quantify? Is that a good result when you didn't even really know what you're asking for in the first place? You got to think about the problem a different way.
Understand the problems. All right, awesome. So this actually brings us to the end of today's fire. Ed, any final thoughts or anything you want to share with the audience?
No, I would just say again, thank you for having me. I want to say that like I'm a big proponent of like open source. So I would just tell everybody to, it's like I would say find something you're interested in and try to find a way to contribute, because what I like outside of AI, what I see happening in the industry now is there's a lot of acquisition, and like I don't want to name a particular technology or anything like that, but you'll hear about a big company acquiring a small company, and a piece of open source software that you really loved, it's now kind of changing hands or ownership. And I think that it's different from the old days. So I would just encourage everybody to contribute to things, so we have this vibrant open source ecosystem, and that it's not, there's just like a more fair playing field for people who want to build things. The only thing I could, there's no CompUSA where you walk down the software aisle anymore, so, and just think about that. So so like all these things, they just need to have a life, and they, you need to, the people who are like, you heard the story about the guy working on sudo. It's just one guy. You use sudo every day. You don't think about that one guy who just loves it to death and who's trying to make it work on every OS and keep it safe. And all those folks need a lot of help, and do something that's cool, and, help open source.
Yes, that's inspiring. Thank you so much, Ed, for jumping into the flame with us and digging into this not often discussed topic with engineering. So thank you so much.
All
You're welcome.
right.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and to everyone listening, first of all, contribute, right? We need live people behind the live code. I can write code, but you need to understand the problems that we're solving, right? See you next time at AI on Fire. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.